It's all about Willie Green in today's show. I'll tell you why his greatest strength will be tested like never before, where he needs to improve, and if his seat is hot at all going into this year. It's a Wednesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with you on this Wednesday, and we are talking head coach Willie Green in today's show. What are his strengths, his weaknesses, what needs to improve this year? What do we expect to get better as well? I've got the answers to all of that and more in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, breaking down this team like nobody else does. We are the number one Pelicans podcast. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Look, you can get a jump start on the NBA season, and this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. Lines are out for opening night. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So let's get into the Willie Green heavy show here. So we'll get into where he needs to improve. We'll talk rotations. We'll talk end of games, too much defense. There's one or two misconceptions about that, I think, but I want to get into his strengths first because there is going to be a test with this. Willie Green's greatest strength, in my opinion, if you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments down below, is connecting with players, getting them to buy in. That's seeing the larger vision, trying hard, all of that, motivating guys. Remember the "you gotta fight" speech, right? That's his greatest strength, in my opinion. Part of that is he's been there for the majority of guys. Top-end players have struggled kind of transitioning to coaching. Pantheon level guys don't always do a good job as an NBA head coach. And in general, it tends to be more role-playing kind of guys because they've kind of been there. And the majority of your team is not star level Kevin Durant-like players. It's, we'll use Devontae Graham and others as an example with that. So getting them to kind of play above their level is really important, particularly in a small market. And Willie Green does that. And to me, this is the most important thing for a coach to be able to do. Like, if you want one thing out of a coach, it's not the X's and O's or the tactical side of things. You can do that with assistants. You need your head coach to kind of be the tone setter. I don't necessarily want to say like the culture setter with all of that, but the guy that can just motivate others. And that's a really, really important thing. And Willie Green does it, right? Guys have started, come off the bench. You don't hear anyone really complaining. More on that in a second, though. Everyone just kind of seems to be bought in, right? And the story that I really like from this is when he moved Devontae Graham from the starting lineup to the bench a couple of years ago, he went over to Graham's home to do this have this conversation one-on-one. It wasn't just, I'm the head coach, you're off the bench, you're on the bench, coming off the bench, that's it, no question. He went over to explain the rationale, the thought process behind everything. There's kind of like a bit of a human personal touch on that sort of thing. And I think that's important. Devontae Graham bought in, and that was the most important thing. This is not easy. Managing egos, managing player expectations, the wants, the wills of 15 different guys on the roster and different motivations is difficult. And Willie Green does that really, really well. There's been no discontent really overall that's leaked out around this Pelicans team. Maybe players only meetings here and there, but that can be a good thing. But no one's like, we hate it here or we hate head coach Willie Green. Again, more on that in a moment. But this will be tested this year in a way that has never been tested before. And it was tested last year a little bit too, but this is the year that Willie Green needs to get this correct. And it has to do with Brandon Ingram. The trade for DeJounte Murray is going to kind of upend this team in a sense from what it's been before. Closing games, it's going to be Zion Williamson, and DeJounte Murray running the offense. Ingram likes to have the ball in his hands. Can you get his buy-in to be more of a team player? That is not really his play style, working off ball and not kind of being the guy with the rock. But can you get him bought into taking more threes, to doing all of that? It didn't really work last year, right? They wanted to run a bit of a different kind of offense, and Brandon Ingram was like, no, I'm not going to kind of do all of that. And that's been, readily reported here, all over the place, not just here on Locked On Pelicans. And you need that. It's not going to work otherwise. So can Willie Green get Ingram's buy-in in a pretty pivotal year to run their offense? Offense has been the problem for New Orleans this past season. Finished 11th last year, but that's a weird 11 in my opinion. Felt worse than that. This year you need to get that right. The West is hyper competitive. So doing that is going to require Willie Green kind of being tested in a way that he never has. Is he going to be able to connect with Ingram, get Ingram bought in a way that he hasn't been, in the past? And maybe Ingram's situation of no one wanting to trade for him, not getting the contract that he wants, that maybe is going to get through to him. Maybe it won't, but it's going to be on the head coach to do this. Otherwise, look, you will see Ingram benched at the end of games. One of the questions that a lot of people put out there is, will he bench someone if they don't fit into the offense to close games? And we'll talk kind of about closing games in the next segment here. But yes, I think that's a very realistic possibility to happen. You saw him bench Ingram against the Lakers at the end of the regular season when Ingram just wasn't getting it done in that game. And that was it was a ballsy move to do that, but it worked. And, they would have won that game if it wasn't for Zion Williamson getting injured, in my opinion. So I think, can do this. And look, if it's not working, it's not working, can make the tough decisions around that. But if he can get Ingram a little bit more bought in than Ingram has seemed in the past to just the concept of the team, right? What's best for everybody here. And that often conflicts with, a player's individual motivations. And if you're Ingram, I understand it, right? Wants to get paid. Probably the best way to do that is show that you can score and you're the man. But that's not what they're going to really be asking him to do this season. So Willie Green with the buy-in. Look, he's gotten Zion to buy in. Even at the beginning of last year when they were kind of going away from a Zion-centric offense. And Zion was saying, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this, but I'm trying. He had Zion's buy-in on that. Now, they reverted from that, and that was the right decision. But he had Zion's buy-in with that sort of thing. And we've seen that hasn't been the easiest thing in the past. So Willie Green can do this. And this is going to be the test of his biggest strength. And again, his strength that he has, I value more than the tactical, the X's and O's and all of that stuff. The in-game adjustments, those sorts of things. I value connecting with the players and getting them buying into what you're doing. The other stuff can be handled by other people. And that also can be improved more easily than kind of the human component of it. I sound like David Griffin saying that, but you get what I mean. So coming up next, what about his weaknesses, the area he needs to improve, the rotations and the closing group? And that leads to bigger things too. But I want to look at those in particular, and we'll kind of expand from that over the rest of the show. So that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, I love sports. There's not a ton of sports outside of baseball going on right now, but FanDuel can let you keep the sports going this summer. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Major League Baseball is in full swing. You can get in on the action for who's going to hit a home run. If you're feeling and thinking some thoughts about the NBA, opening night lines are out. You have the Knicks at the Celtics. Teams getting their rings. The ring ceremony home team struggles in that one. Knicks are plus 5.5. That might be a good move. So if you think the Knicks have the upset on opening night, you can get in on the action right now. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the official sports betting partner of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the Number One Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday. If you're an everydayer, I see y'all in the comments. Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. For your second listen, it's the Locked On NBA podcast. Monday through Friday, it is there. The different rotating hosts covering everything you want to know about the association. I'm on there today on Wednesday with John Krause of Locked On Celtics. We're looking at the NBA Cup. We're talking about Kevin Durant maybe retiring. He's got some comments out there about it. Make the Locked On NBA podcast your second listen today. Tomorrow on Locked On NBA, I want to do a grab bag of different things. Different starting lineups depending on the opponent. Yes, no, I'll tell you what. We'll look at the NBA Cup, why I love it, and a couple of other things as well in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. But today we are talking about head coach Willie Green. And we just went over his strengths. That's the biggest thing, right? Like, teams try hard for him. He's got a winning record. He's 127-19. How many coaches in Pelicans history have a winning record? Have 2 playoff appearances, including one without Zion Williamson, right? His record, his winning percentage is 51.6%. It's above 500. It's pretty good. You know, this past season was almost 60% of their games won. But let's get into the weaknesses here. And I know the 2 that most people are going to shout out, and that's rotations and closing games. So on the rotations, you know, the first thing is with this, every fan base, not just you, every fan base complains about their head coach's rotations when they're not winning. That is the number one thing. I keep track of other fan bases. I pay attention to it. I'm paid to. That's what they do. I don't always think it's the most appropriate, right? I think there's more nuance to it than this other guy should be playing, right? You know, the nuance part of it is, rather than the rotations being like, you should just be playing the other guys, you know, why isn't he playing a certain guy? Is there a reason for it? Jordan Hawkins is a good example. Didn't get the minutes he wanted last year. You know, at times he was a little bit upset with that. And, you know, part of it is, you know, with Willie Green, there are not necessarily clear-cut expectations, right? We know defense will get you on the court, but if you're scoring and playing okay defense, sometimes that's not enough. And sometimes you've been in a starting role and you just get benched for no reason. Go back a couple of years when out of the All-Star break after Trey Murphy had been starting, they just benched him for 3 games and promptly went 0-3 before putting him back in. And it just felt like an arbitrary move. You know, Willie Green has some stubbornness to him, and it shines through, you know, in a variety of different ways, but sometimes he just kind of has his guys. And maybe the data, the analytics, and even the eye test and the film say that player shouldn't be playing or be used in that role, and he sticks with it for whatever reason. And that's not great, and that's an area he needs to improve. So rather than just being like the rotations are crap, it's let's look at that more, and maybe there just needs to be clearer expectations for these players so they know what to work on, and it doesn't feel like they're kind of just being yanked around in different roles, starting, not starting, minutes, no minutes, that sort of thing. That's what I find more interesting about the rotations, not just that, oh, they're bad, right? It's there needs to be a little bit more rationale and kind of data-driven approach, in my opinion, behind some of that, because we saw, you know, with Larry Nance Jr. last year, starting in the second half of games, and it just didn't work. Now, they didn't want to play Jonas Valanciunas anyway. It just didn't fit into what they were doing. And we'll talk rebounding in tomorrow's show, by the way. So, because of that, you know, you went with Larry. The analytics said don't do that, right? That's what the data said. And they still went with it anyway. That's, I think, a bit of an exception because they just weren't going to play Jonas, right? Like, that's why he was never re-signing here no matter what. But those are the type of things that do need to improve. Some of the decisions are a little bit head-scratching with everything. You know, and then this gets kind of blown up a little bit more at the end of games. Closing games for the Pelicans, the fourth quarter was tough for them last year, right? They blew a ton of double-digit leads. They couldn't mount comebacks, you know, and so on and so forth. And this is where Willie Green needs to trust and empower others. So first and foremost, look, at the end of games, when they became pretty easy to defend, you know, it's either going to be the Zion Williamson show, and it should be, get him the ball and just let him get ahead of steam and try and attack the basket. But when that isn't working or the defenses take it away or Zion's hurt, you have DeJounte Murray. You know, you have a point guard out there that can kind of organize the offense and help keep the Pelicans centered and get them scoring opportunities late in games. That fixes a lot of this, in my opinion. Some of it was personnel driven, right? Where Zion wasn't playing or Ingram wasn't playing. Yeah, who's going to score? So that does get a little bit better this year. But this is also where, yeah, you do need to find a better balance between offense and defense. And Willie Green is a defensive-focused guy, but you hired James Borrego for a reason. You have your assistant coaches for a reason, and they need to be empowered and trusted to help you win games, and it shouldn't just be on Willie Green being like, I like these guys. There's plenty of data that said they needed to skew more offensive at the end of games than they were last year. This is about empowering and trusting everyone else within this organization and not just Willie Green wanting to stick with his guys or sticking with his approach. There's enough data to say that it didn't work, right? If you have a double-digit lead and you're running a defensive unit out there and you keep losing games, your defensive unit isn't working. You're allowing the opponent to score, right? They outscored you by double digits just to get that victory. That can't happen this year. One of the things we'll talk a little bit, and we'll get into more of this in a minute, is that the West is tough. Your margin for error this season is really, really thin. Really, really thin, I think, right? One game could make or break you in terms of the play-in tournament, in terms of, home court advantage potentially too, or even missing the postseason. You need to get things right this year. And this is not a year where Willie Green can afford to not grow. So trusting others, getting that input, looking at all available data sources, film, stats, analytics, all of that stuff, right? You need to get it right this year. And there needs to be a different kind of approach, I think. Now, some of this is, look, Najee Marshall, who I loved, is gone, but at times hurt them closing games. Larry Nance Jr., you can't go to him. He was more of a defensive guy, not the offensive player they needed, and it worked and didn't work. Well, it's not an option anymore to kind of stick with those type of players. And so given that the makeup of the roster is a little bit more offensive than it has been in the past, you'll see him be forced to do it just by the players available. You don't like to have to kind of do addition by subtraction, take away the things that Willie Green wants to use because otherwise he'll use them when that's not the best. But that's kind of the situation we're in. And that's his stubbornness. That needs to change this year, right? Like that needs to change this year. And I think one of the things that will help this is also just clear expectations for players. Clear expectations for everybody. That's only a good thing in like any organization, right? So setting that will help them close games better. And also him being empowered to put guys on the bench if it's just not working or they're not fitting in, right? That's going to be a really important thing. The tactical acumen from him is not great. At times, I think he's subpar in that area, but that's why you've got to rely on your coaches and know that that is a weakness of yourself. You need to be introspective, self-aware of those sorts of things. Willie Green has said at times that he is, but this is like the year you've got to just do it because otherwise you're going to be kind of stuck in a really tough Western Conference, not winning games in the way that you truly want to do. The West is stacked, y'all. Like it's stacked. The margin for error is very thin. But this is the type of thing that can really help. When it comes to the rotations, let's use Jordan Hawkins again as an example, right? Like he won't be frustrated if he's not getting minutes if he knows why he was pulled. But it has seemed arbitrary, not just to us, but to players, right? That's where while he gets the buy-in, you don't hear like overall mutinies or anything like that happening. There are at times grumbles from players. Now, that's going to happen on any team. That's to be expected. It's not all sunshine and rainbows and everyone's happy all the time. Again, everyone has a different agenda, different motivations for what they want. But, it's tough to complain when you go, I'm going to get benched if I do this thing wrong. And then they go and do that thing wrong. The expectation being clear for how you earn minutes, how you find a spot in the rotation needs to be clear. And there needs to be kind of the same leash given to not every player, right? Zion, Ingram, Murray are going to have different leashes, longer leashes to mess up and do things wrong than other guys will. But kind of for everyone else, it needs to be, I think, a little bit more fair. And that eliminates some of those grumbling, some of the discontent. Maybe that's a word I should have used earlier when it comes to this. And that hasn't been kind of made clear to these players. And I think that's been confusing for guys at times. It's time to eliminate that and get everyone on the exact same page from the get-go here. And then stick by that. Don't be like, don't change that. Your expectations for your players and what's expected of them shouldn't totally change throughout the year where they're then confused again. Don't kind of pull a 180 or a U-turn or go 90 degrees from where you were before because that's not fair to other guys and that's going to make them upset. And that's something that will definitely improve this team next year. So let's get into the hot seat question. Is Willie Green on the hot seat going in? Is there a way he ends up on the hot seat? Is there a way he ends up fired? Along with a couple of other things that he needs to get right this year. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the Number One Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For your second listen, Locked On Saints. First preseason game in the books. What's the offensive line going to do? Derek Carr went 11 for 11 in practice the other day. Ross Jackson, Locked On Saints, make them your second listen. Today is going to make sense of everything black and gold. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So here's a question a lot of people want to know. And we'll talk more about Willie Green and some things in tomorrow's show. Rebounding, what are they going to do? How do they approach that this year, right? Like that's something that I want to get into in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans, which I'm about to record a little bit early. Is Willie Green going to be on the hot seat? He's not on the hot seat right now. Like he shouldn't be on the hot seat right now. They made the playoffs last year. Didn't go well in the first round. They got swept, but you didn't have Zion. You know, they were still growing, and though Zion and Ingram were healthier than they've ever been, they still missed, good large amounts of games. And when you don't have your best players, you're just going to lose. It's like truly as simple as that, right? That's the case for any team. Rotations, tactical acumen, and all that ain't going to matter if you don't have the players out there on the court. And for someone who's 127-19, a 51.6 winning percentage, almost won 60% of his games this past season, and with room to grow and improve, it's in a sense a make it or break it year for Willie Green. But I don't think he's going to be on the, in the past, losses could be blamed on health, but let's assume that they're going to be healthy again this year. This is a bit of make it or break it. Doesn't mean he's going to get fired because, as I said in the previous segment, your margin for error is minuscule. The West is tough. I think the West is wide open, but the West is tough. It's going to be hard to win games. And skewing a little too defensively with the wrong player out there on the court, if that costs you a game, that might make a big difference at the end of the regular season. So he needs to get things right. If he doesn't, and they are a play-in tournament team again instead of being top 6 because of things that you can really kind of point the finger at Willie Green for, I think that's the type of thing that puts him on the hot seat going into the season after, in the final year of his deal at that point. So I do think that Willie Green isn't on the hot seat this year. I really don't see them making a change, but after this year, I could see that seat being blaring hot. They should make the playoffs again in some capacity, whether it's play-in tournament or whether that's just outright being a top 6 seed. They should. There's enough talent here. And Willie Green's challenge this year is going to be to figure it out. Who's your starting group? Look, I don't know. You don't know. We have ideas, but we don't know. He's got to figure that out. We talked about the rotations of, how do you determine a lineup is working? And when do you go to that lineup in games? Those are the things that he needs to figure out this year. If he doesn't do that, this team will flounder a little bit, I think. They'll still have enough talent to win a lot of games, but they won't really excel. They won't truly succeed in the way that we hope they will or that they could. Last year, the way I talked about this team was they didn't reach their full potential. It's why I called it the season of disappointment. They left a lot on the table. You've got to leave less on the table this season than you did. You're obviously going to leave some on the table, right? Some wins, things like that. That's just how it goes in the NBA. This season, it's got to be a little bit less. You've got to get closer to reaching your potential. Willie Green is going to, potentially help them do that or not. Getting these rotations right. When do you deviate from your starting lineup? One of the big questions that he needs to answer is, do you keep the core guys together? They like to stagger these players a lot. Do you maybe just ride your starting unit more than you did otherwise in the past? Because that hasn't always been how he's done his rotations, right? Zion doesn't play the full first quarter. He could. Would that maybe be a better move to do? Should you play him the entirety of the fourth? They kind of have a set rotation pattern. Guys get subbed out usually around the same time every game, and then sub back in right around the same time every game, and that's your rotation. You adjust it a little bit due to fouls, due to other things, but you largely stick kind of with your game plan. And we'll talk more about that in tomorrow's show because I think that's something that people don't truly get. So you definitely want to tune into that when we talk about like different starting lineups. And look, the easy answer to that one is no, absolutely not. And I'll explain why. But Willie Green needs to determine what the strengths of this team are, the weaknesses are, maximize the strengths, minimize the weaknesses. Defense can be good, but if you're not scoring, that's not working. And it's time for that to change this year, but I don't think it puts him on the hot seat this year. And I don't think it means that, he's in danger of being fired, anything like that. After this coming year, so the 2025-2026 season, yeah, I think no matter what happens in the playoffs this year, this seat will be hot. No matter what happens this year, playoffs, no playoffs, that seat will be hot 2 years from now. Certainly, right? The expectations are going to be high, especially if you make the playoffs again. The expectations are going to be high with Murray, with Zion, and potential other moves to be made. We'll see if Willie Green responds, adjusts. What do you think his strengths are? Did I hit the weaknesses? Is there something I'm missing? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate y'all so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NolaJake on Twitter. This has been the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll see y'all tomorrow.